2020 regular meeting of the City of Troy Planning Commission. Copies of the agenda for tonight's meeting are available at the entrance to the room. Agendas and minutes of prior meetings are available on the city website. The meeting will be conducted in accordance with the agenda as presented or amended by the Planning Commission. State law establishes planning commissions. The Planning Commission is comprised of 9 residents appointed to serve their community. Members are appointed by the mayor and confirmed by City Council. Other individuals participating in the meeting include representatives of the city's, of the city's planning department, city attorney's office, and our consultant is not here, but we'll just leave it at that.
I give him a night off.
Good. If you wish to address the Planning Commission, please come forward to the microphone. When recognized, and clearly print your name and address on the sign-in sheet. Please begin your remarks by stating your name for the benefit of the commissioners. All remarks are to be addressed to the Planning Commission, not to anyone else in the room. If you have a cell phone or other device that might disrupt the meeting, please either switch it to silent mode or turn it off. At this time, I'd like the Planning Commission Recording Secretary, Kathy Sarnecki, to conduct the roll call.
Mr. Abhidian.
Here.
Ms. Cruz. Here. Mr. Faison. Mr. Hudson.
Here.
Mr. Krent.
Here.
Mr. Lambert.
Here.
Ms. Parakis. Here. Mr. Rahman.
Here.
Mr. Tagle.
Going on to the next item, approval of the agenda. If anyone would like to make a motion to approve the agenda? So, Mr. Lambert, second, please. Mr. Rahman, vote, please.
Ms. Cruz. Yes. Mr. Hudson.
Yes.
Mr. Krent.
Yes.
Mr. Lambert.
Yes.
Ms. Parakis.
Yes.
Mr. Rahman.
Yes.
Mr. Abhidian.
Yes.
Next item is approval of the minutes of the February 11th, 2020 meeting. Do we have a motion to,
I'll move to approve the minutes.
okay, any second on that?
I'll second.
Okay. The vote, Ms. Sarnecki?
Mr. Hudson.
Yes.
Mr. Krent.
Yes.
Mr. Lambert.
Yes.
Ms. Parakis.
Yes.
Mr. Rahman.
Yes.
Mr. Abhidian.
Yes.
Next item is public comment for items that are not on tonight's agenda. Is there anyone in the audience that would like to speak on an item not on the agenda tonight? No. Seeing none and hearing none, we'll move on to the next item. It's the zoning ordinance text amendment for cluster square footage.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. So we've discussed this in numerous meetings, and we held a public hearing on this item. Many of you may remember, because the public hearing was, I believe it was after midnight at our meeting in December. And give you some background, we have a one-family cluster zoning ordinance that was put in place a number of years ago to encourage the preservation of open space. And we also, the Planning Commission and City Council, wanted to incentivize the development of smaller homes that were suitable for empty nesters and retirees, with the first floor master bedroom, first floor laundry. And so what we did was provided incentives in the one family cluster language that provide density bonuses, not only for preservation of open space, but also for homes that were 1,500 square foot or less in area. And we've seen some developments utilize this option, but not many. We haven't got the number of smaller homes that we felt we were going to see for us. So we put together an amendment. We talked about a study meeting, and we came up with the number of 1,700 square feet for the public hearing. And then you'll recall at the public hearing we had input from a developer from Robertson Brothers, who indicated that 1,900 square feet would something that his company would be more interested in. And subsequent to that, I got a letter from another developer all confirming the fact that 1,900 square feet would be more appropriate, would potentially encourage or incentivize more of these units. I also anecdotally talked to another developer who didn't give us anything in writing. I asked him to, but he didn't. But he agreed with the 1,900 square foot provision. So this is not scientific, but we try to somewhat be scientific insofar as we started at 1,500 square feet. We went around and around on where that starting point was. If you recall, I think, Karen, you were at 2,000, if I recall. I believe certainly Mr. Edmonds was, because he wanted room for his grand.
Well,
his
he had that
piano.
grand piano.
Yeah. But what the intent is that these homes be appropriate, again, for empty nesters and retirees. My feeling is when you get past 2,000 square feet, you start to become less of a home that's appropriate for that type of demographic and more of a same old type home. So 1,900 seems about right in my mind, but we're here to kind of talk about that. And I think the reason that we didn't have this discussion further in December was the clock struck midnight before we talked about it, and I think everyone just, their brain cells were not functioning. I know mine weren't. So
I was toast.
yeah. So I think based on the feedback we've gotten in previous meetings and also some of the feedback we did get at that meeting, 1,900 seemed reasonable. I did see some heads nodding when Tim Lockron was here from Robinson Brothers. But we're here to talk about that magic number of 1,900 square feet.
Anybody want to bring up any points about the increase to 1,900? Mr. Lambert?
Just one. I remember one of the things vaguely, because it was after midnight, somebody tossed out the idea of a sliding scale. Did you look at that and determine it just wasn't feasible?
It's feasible, my thought was that if 1,900 is the max, and if someone wanted to come with something smaller, like if they had a product that was 1,500 or 1,750 or whatever that number was under, they could still do that, or they could do a mix of different sizes. And we wanted the administration of this to remain somewhat simple, so we didn't go down that path.
Thanks.
Anyone else?
Yeah, I have a question about the cluster homes situation. Is the idea that there's like many acres and that they're putting the homes like on a certain section so the rest is open?
Yes, exactly. So to qualify for the cluster, right out of the gate, an applicant has to have at least 20% open space. So with that 20% open space, they earn a 20% density bonus. 30% open space, 30% density bonus, and so on.
Okay.
Obviously, there's a cap that's kind of built into it because you can only preserve so much open space when you also want to add units. But what it allows applicants to do is trade off for the open space that they save elsewhere on the site. They can group the homes closer together or cluster the homes closer together. And the intent is that the open space be around the perimeter and serve as a buffer from
Okay.
surrounding properties and also from the road.
So is that desirable? I'm asking if it's desirable because when I personally would prefer to have my house with the open space around my house, to have my yard and not be real close to my neighbors. And I mean, I'm not like talking acres, but just, so I'm just wondering, if there's a demand for this kind of housing?
There is, because we've seen quite a number of these developments come before Planning Commission and City Council, and while the information I'm given, they sell very quickly.
Okay.
In fact, there's a cluster development on Rochester Road. It's called Midtown Crossing Cluster, and it's duplexes, and half of them are 1,500 square feet or less. And we got more phone calls to the planning department for that development than we did in my almost 18 years here for any other development, and that's only for a 14-unit development. So there is a lot of demand. And I think that the feeling is, for someone like you who's got some kids and wants the space to play in, that type of home you live in is great. But for those who don't want to maintain or don't want or need a large yard, a smaller yard is, you can still have your outdoor patio area and some private space of your own, but it's less maintenance and the open space is elsewhere, and so it's more communal.
Okay.
So,
In theory.
in theory.
No,
Right.
practice.
Right.
Yeah.
So I was going to say many of the same things that Brent just said to you, right? Sometimes, the empty nester community, or someone who is either single or newly married or divorced, isn't looking for all of that yard,
Okay.
right?
Yep.
They're not looking for all of that yard because they don't want to maintain it.
Okay.
And the cluster ordinance was developed to preserve the green space, right? We heard so much testimony in the public hearing forum from residents who were concerned about all of the green space that was disappearing, and we as a planning commission had very real concerns about developers buying parcels of land and then just clear cutting trees, you know, and completely disregarding any of the natural features that they might find on a parcel, or having respect for the vegetation and the trees that were there. We also promoted this cluster development because we recognized that within the city, we were not attracting the diverse demographic in terms of age that we were looking for. We certainly have cultural diversity, but we don't necessarily have age diversity. And so in order for this city to be thriving, not only do we want young people, but we also want senior citizens. And we had this sort of missing housing
Okay.
that the cluster development could provide. I think that, you know, our biggest challenges, and you guys can disagree with me, I think our biggest challenges with the cluster is we are a community that's used to bigger homes. I mean, we certainly have more than enough of what I would describe as the McMansion style home. So if you're coming off of 3,000, 3,500, 4,000 square feet, the idea of moving or downsizing, aging in place to a 1,500 square foot home is a little painful.
Yeah, yeah.
That's a little small, right?
Right.
Just because you've got the kids gone doesn't mean you're necessarily ready to go to something that small. And then our other challenge, of course, is the whole real estate market. And I was just sitting here on my phone working the calculator, and if you take into consideration that the average square foot in the city is, call it anywhere between 150 to 170 a square foot, as compared to Royal Oak, which is 200 a square foot, as compared to Birmingham, which is probably 225, 250 a square foot, and Detroit, which is 200 a square foot. If you're fresh out of college, you're hard pressed to be able to find something to buy, because even at 150 square feet, you're pushing the $300,000 mark.
Okay.
And you've not done any builder upgrades,
Right.
right? That's all just basic come on in stuff, nor does it include the landscaping.
Right. But how are we gonna, I mean, those are all great points. Thank you for sort of describing that for me. The question that I would have is the challenge of, you know, we're seeing things coming in that are not really speaking to this. They're a lot smaller. I'm confused as to who the target market is. To me, a cluster development with 1,900 square feet seems exactly what senior citizens would like. Downsizing, empty nesters. I don't know if it captures that young person coming in. It's probably a little bit big and expensive. But you know, you don't have to do it all in the same thing. But I'm not sure. Yeah, I mean,
I think that a lot of what we've seen in terms of multifamily, you know, these apartment buildings, these townhomes, these multifamily units at some level are going to have to be what attracts that younger individual, because the housing's too expensive. They can afford to pay $1,700 a month in rent. That buying a home that's $350,000
Right.
and coming up with a down payment may be a bigger stretch. So some of these multifamily housing developments sort of fill that gap. Brent, I don't know, maybe I'm way wrong.
No, I agree, and there, also anecdotally, we have conversations with every developer asking them, you know, why aren't you considering this 1,500 square foot? And a lot of them say it's just too small. If it was a little bit bigger, we'd be able to meet the demand. When you're at 1,500 square feet, your margin of error is so small. When they come before, and this happened for one of the developments, they came before the planning commission, and one of the planning commissioners said, well, can you pull that foyer out a little bit? And he said, I guess I could, but if I I'm at 1,500 square feet, so if I pull that a foot or two this way, I've got to lose area in my master bedroom or in my living room or my kitchen, and like, where's it going to come from? And it's a lot of surgery just because of that extra 400 feet that we're talking about provides for flexibility. It's not a lot of area, it's 20 by 20, but it's a difference maker in terms of how willing developers are to build that type of product. So the hope is that if we go to this number, we'll see more, and especially where if a property is located on a major mile road, they can have duplexes and have that common wall, which allows them to save more open space because they don't have that yard between some of the units.
So one of the subjects that has come up in the past when we had this conversation about cluster is the idea that once we get these homes having a smaller footprint, then we have the garage dominant issue come up in the conversation. So as I'm looking through this packet that we got and the sample elevations that we got from Robertson Brothers, it seems like most of these elevations actually have the garage dominant feature where the garage frontage is more than half of that frontage of that home. So if we go in that direction, I think we are going to be kind of faced with this issue now as we get projects coming up from these developers where the garage, they have to get creative, like maybe with that elevation where they somewhat hide the garage dominant behind some other architectural features, or else we might have to be a little bit more lenient on that side, knowing that the elevations that coming from these projects are going to have a very narrow frontage and also have lots that are probably more narrow than our R1Es that are 60 feet. So we can expect these projects where setbacks between homes might end up being 7, 8, 9 feet, and we'll have these garage dominant somewhat, and of some relatively narrow lots when you've got the frontage of the home probably 38, 36 feet. So I'm just throwing it out there of what I think we can expect from these developers as we start seeing these projects.
Yeah, I was just saying that from a business standpoint, it will be more feasible because we are not seeing those 1,500 square foot homes. If it's 1,900, obviously the builders get some wiggle room, so they can offer more with some profit. Otherwise, those have to be really expensive because I have seen some other examples in other communities where they really have to put like expensive material or expensive things to make make a business case. Then it become unaffordable. No one would like to buy a 1,500 square feet house with the price of a 1,900 square feet house. So I think this 1,900 would give a little bit more wiggle room to the builders so that they can make it a business case, the way I see it. So we probably will see more of these houses in the city.
Anyone else?
Piggybacking on what Mr. Abdahedian said, 100% agree. One of the things that builders tell us is they still, even though it's empty nester or retirees, they still want a 2-car garage. Still active,
Right.
with active couple, you need 2 cars.
I need 4.
And again, yes, you got a collector in
Yeah.
the family.
So that, and then when you start to talk, so then the next thought is, well, what about side entry? Well, that's great, but we just don't have vast tracts of vacant land here. The properties that are left undeveloped, they're either really small or what developers are doing. You've seen it, they're buying up backyards, they're assembling properties just to assemble enough area to be able to be feasible for these types of products. So I agree, we're going to see more of these. So the key is they've got to take a creative approach to making that front facade look attractive. An example, and with that 1,900 square feet, you can pull the living room up, or you can be more creative. So and you notice the quality garage door. That's it.
Right.
Nice garage door.
That is a beautiful garage door.
Yeah.
That's the same style as the home.
Yeah.
That craftsman look.
If you remember when we went on our field trip, we looked at these types of communities, the first one we went in was garage door, garage door, garage door, garage door, if you remember that.
Yep.
And it was like, kind of aesthetically just didn't look good, but these are pretty nice.
Any other comments? Okay, we'll just rotate, go ahead.
Oh. I was just going to say, my concern, though, I mean, I'm all for the 1900. I definitely think we need to give the builders the flexibility to do that. But what I'm concerned, and I guess I'm just expressing a concern, because I don't think there's anything we can do about it, but we are targeting sort of these empty nesters and people, but you guys are describing lot size as being an issue, but I do feel that people are looking for, our target audience anyways, looking for first floor masters or ranches. And so those are kind of more sprawling. A 1,900 square foot ranch needs land, needs space. So I'm worried that we're going to continue to see these narrow duplexes that are very vertical, and they're not really solving the problem, because I feel like a lot of people who are downsizing really want that first floor master and ideally a ranch. So I don't know if there's anything we can do about that, but.
Go ahead.
So, kind of in response to that, I guess the idea behind the cluster is that the developer has the flexibility to bring forth a floor plan that has a first floor master, but they only get that incentive of actually getting that those extra units if the master's on the first floor and if they stay under the 1,900 square feet. So it has to be both. They can't have the master upstairs and have 1,900 square feet. So
But we are requiring
right, so that's what the whole thing is about this cluster.
sorry,
The master
guys.
has to be on the first floor.
sorry, I didn't know that.
Right.
Yeah.
So that's the idea behind incentivizing these, that they don't have an option if they want to
I
actually build
understand,
under
I'm
the
sorry, I
cluster
didn't
option.
catch that, okay. And a ranch is just, they don't have to do a ranch.
They don't have to.
Okay.
They could have, some models I've seen have a guest bedroom and/or an office upstairs, but the master suite is on the first floor and the laundry room's on the first floor.
Okay.
My parents live in one of those now. My mom can't go up or downstairs.
Yeah.
It's great.
Just another thought, kind of anticipating based on what we've seen with some of these projects, especially the ones that come up in the node. You know, it's not quite apples to apples, but it's somewhat similar in terms of the kind of the feedback that we get from residents. So what we've seen is that whatever the project that comes before us, let's say for example the node, we get the whole conversation going about not being compatible. So we get neighborhoods that have these 2,500 to 3,000 square foot homes, and all of a sudden the developers, you know, they'll go in and put in on 2 acres or 3 acres a cluster with 1,800 square foot homes. I think we might expect that pushback from residents saying they don't want these small footprint homes in their neighborhood because it'll bring down the values of their 3,000 square foot homes.
We've already seen that.
So it'll meet the need of a certain demographic, but then we'll get some feedback from residents, the same way we get pushback from these nodes with these condos saying, you know, they don't fit in my neighborhood for these reasons, even though that's an excellent product for somebody that needs 1,800 square foot home. But I think we can expect that pushback from these neighbors saying, it doesn't look like my 3,200 square foot home. I don't want it next to me.
Don't we have a transition, especially around the perimeter of cluster? Don't we have a green space requirement?
Yep, we do. 40, a minimum of 40 feet. So the counter to that, that's a good, you're right, you're 100% right. The counter argument to that is, they can do 1,500 today. So we're making them, if your concern is they're too small, they can do bigger. We're mandating it that they can do 400 square foot larger.
We're going in the positive direction. We're
Right.
improving the
Right.
current ordinance.
Right. And if the concern is duplexes, those are only allowed when they front and have access on a major road. So they're not going to connect to the neighborhoods, internal neighborhoods.
I recall when we had that developer come in with, and I can't remember the developer's name, but it was that project where he said 1,500 that was the first one that came in, 1,500 was too small, and I asked, can you squeeze in a side entrance? He says, yes, we had an extra, I can't remember how much
Yep.
more square footage, but I'm just saying, these cluster homes can have side entrance garages, and especially now that if we increase it to 1,900, I think that's much more doable. And that developer basically came forward and said, yeah, we can put a side entrance, but we need X amount of square footage to do it. So I think the 1,900 will provide that flexibility for side entrance. The other thing is is brought up by Bob Gibbs, the idea of an alley for rear entrance for garages. And that's another thing that we really haven't talked through enough, but he brought in some great examples of that type of development and they were pretty tight homes.
Yeah.
So that's another, would that fit into our cluster plan or not?
It could work. That what you're talking about, there's they have the fronts of the elevation, front elevations face like a central courtyard area, and then in the back is the access to the garage, and the drive goes around the perimeter of it.
Correct.
To provide access. So it's a different type of design, but it could work. But again, the challenge is we have a really good problem. Land's really expensive, and another problem that's not a good problem for developers is there's not a lot of vacant land available. That's one of our challenges.
But that green space that they need to get more density could be
Yes.
center courtyard. Again, then it brings people to their front porches, hopefully a little more community activity. You know, kids playing ball, and of course we're talking about not kids, but I mean, you're just throwing
Dog park.
dog park, could be a lot of things. But it gives that green space.
I saw that, Mr.
talk-
Hudson.
Dog park.
Not happy about dogs?
He rolled his eyes into last
Well, we
week.
got one here in the city, and
Yes, we do.
we took a dog over there, and it's nothing. It's a muddy, barren piece of land, and the dog rocks around. It wasn't a good experience.
Okay, well, maybe there'll be plantings that'll grow someday.
That would be hopeful. And some drainage.
Okay.
Yeah, drainage.
Anyone else? Oh, Mr. Lambert, go ahead.
I know Mr. Savin knows I have a pet peeve about the term cluster development. And I know we might be able to deal with it tonight, but from a marketing point of view, the word cluster connotes a lot of bad images to people. Is that required by state law to use that term, or
No.
is that sometime in the future we could discuss another term other than cluster?
It's a word that's accepted in the industry, in the planning industry. But if we wanted to change the word, we certainly could change. We could change the term. We could, yes.
Hey, now you got a new
Something
assignment.
Okay.
So if you want to be creative and come up with something,
Well, you guys kind of did with the signs now, that instead of saying cluster development, it says what, open space preservation, so.
yeah.
That sounds nice. It's a little longer.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Mr. Appihidian.
So just kind of a follow-up thought on the whole idea with the alleys. I think the way our cluster ordinance is written right now, it really incentivizes a setback as a green space, right? So it doesn't allow for an alley that's paved to be a setback, because then it wouldn't be included in that green space in the buffer area. So maybe we can add some kind of language that would allow that flexibility, that green space can be paved.
Yeah.
If we allow some kind of design for that back alley, kind of a setup where we have the frontage of the home be the entire frontage without a garage, and put that garage in the back, a detached. So that's a totally different design. than
Yeah,
what we have now.
I think those, correct me if I'm wrong, I think they're called cottage court developments.
Yeah.
And we could look at language. So the language right now would permit the type of development, but what you're stating, and I think you're right, is the road, the setback, required setback would not include the road.
Right.
So we'd look at, so we could look at that. So, but just, what I'd like to do is move forward with this,
Yeah.
and then we can look at other amendments.
That could be another type
Yeah.
of development.
Yeah.
Yes,
I think that's a totally different product.
yeah.
Totally different in cluster, but it would require some different setback requirements that would allow that flexibility built in where.
Yeah, and those work better on the small lots.
Yeah.
The small parcels were like infill parcels. So,
Any further discussion before we come up with, this is a resolution on this?
yeah, it's a resolution recommending approval of the amendment. I don't think I added a,
That's okay, we can come up with that language. Anyone want to move that resolution forward?
I'll
couldn't find
move.
it.
That's all I have to do is
That's
so
it?
move.
No,
I'll move.
well, move.
Oh, I'm not writing the
The change
resolution.
to 1,900 square foot.
You
Change
can-
it from 1,500 to 1,900
well,
square feet.
the draft
Do
that's
we have a
before you
draft?
has 1,900 square foot in it, so you could.
Page 9.
The planning commission could recommend approval of the proposed text amendment as written.
Oh, now I gotta find, well, see, this is why no one raised their damn hand.
I didn't put it in there. You have to, I forgot to put it in there.
You'll do fine.
Sorry.
What do you want me to say?
Well, you can say what you want, but it was something to the effect of the planning commission recommends approval of the proposed text amendment as written.
Oh, I gotcha, okay. So the planning commission approves the text amendment as written, changing the minimum requirement for bonus from 1,500 per square foot to 1,900 per square foot.
1,500 square foot per unit.
Per unit to 1,900 square foot per unit.
And that was a recommendation, not approval. So you're.
Recommending.
Yep.
Okay, we are recommending.
Do we have a second? Oh, Mike beat you to the. Yep.
Never doing it again.
Yes, you can.
You nailed it.
Okay, roll call, please.
Who beat who? I'm sorry.
Mike.
Mike.
got it.
Thank you.
Hey, just one
Oh, go
question,
ahead. Yes.
one clarification. Does this verbiage mean what we've known up until now, all bonus unit in excess of the base yield? Does that mean 1-to-1 equal bonus unit? Okay, so that hasn't changed.
Hasn't changed.
Okay.
Only
One
the
thing
only the
that's
square
changed
foot.
is the square foot.
Number. Okay.
Roll call, please.
Mr. Hudson?
Yes.
Mr. Krant?
Yes.
Mr. Lambert?
Yes.
Ms. Parakis?
Yes.
Mr. Rahman?
Yes.
Mr. Appuhiddian?
Yes.
Ms. Cruz?
Yes.
We'll move on to the next item, which is public comment for items on the current agenda. Anyone in the audience would like to speak on that? Seeing none, we'll move on to planning commission comment. I'll start with Ms. Parakis. Go ahead.
I don't think I have anything.
All right, good. Karen? Do you have something to say?
The only thing that I will say is, first of all, I can't believe we're done so quickly. I don't even know how to behave. But I know a nice establishment down the street that we could all go visit. But I will just beat my drum again on how we can do so much more with the civic center area than what we are currently doing. Again, I'm not necessarily suggesting going down the path of Bob Gibbs, but what I am suggesting is that our residents seem to want more in terms of green space and amenities in the city of Troy, and this area certainly offers that opportunity. And so I think that, you know, it would behoove us to look at some of the things that we could do that improve the land for everyone, and get rid of the construction parking lot and the skate park and some of the other things that, you know, drag us down and require us to fertilize and water and mow and otherwise do nothing. So that's my comment.
Anything from Mr. Frank?
No, thank you.
No.
I'll go right over to.
No, I don't have any comment.
So just one comment from last night's council meeting. The subject came up from some of the council candidates, kind of related to our conversation tonight about affordable housing. So maybe one day we can actually dive into that topic a little bit more, because I'm not quite sure that this cluster ordinance is really addressing that that need in the city, and that subject that got brought up. Because if we're getting a cluster development, these properties are selling for 300,000 plus 350-ish, even though they're at 17, 18, 1900 square feet. I'm not sure that would classify as affordable housing. So maybe we need to have that conversation and dive a little bit deeper of what that looks like. Maybe we need a totally new ordinance that provides an incentive for that kind of housing in the city, because that seems to come up a lot in the conversations. And what does affordable housing look like in Troy? You know, what are we looking at building? And so just kind of throwing that out there for some future dialogue.
Just to piggyback on that, does affordable housing also mean that we need to do it as sort of a public-private development, you know, something where we have a huge global employer, let's call it Kelly, let's call it Altair. You know, remember that project we saw with Altair, that they wanted to expand their campus? Do you enter into some public-private agreement where the affordable housing is subsidized by some of the largest employers in the city who really need to be able to offer that to the young talent that they're trying to
I guess
attract?
that's
You know,
up for
I think
discussion.
that's an important point, because if you think about maybe planting some sort of structure for low affordable housing close to or in major subdivisions right now, there can be a hue and a cry. But Altair, it's a perfect place for it. They've got the space, it's got the building and the community for that. I guess that was my comment. I didn't.
Just to clarify, we only have one meeting in March, so we won't be meeting, what, the 10th or so? So,
That's right.
okay. Thank you.
Good memory.
It's because it's election, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, what I have to, bouncing off that affordable housing, I was at a Troy Chamber event this morning, and Garland Gilchrist talked about affordable housing in the whole state, but his comment was, for many college graduates coming out, it's eating up 40 to 50% of their income and in years past, it was sort of like the line was 25%. That was like, you know, no more than 25% of your income should be toward housing. So how do we get that? Do we want that in Troy? And to what degree do we want it? You know, we could certainly build projects, housing, and those could be affordable, but is that the Troy we want? So that's another discussion, but I'm just saying, you could probably find a development that'll produce a house that is that inexpensive, but it may not be of the quality we want.
Yeah, I was thinking, when I got married, we moved into an apartment, Gardena Garden Apartments in Royal Oak. We could afford that.
They're still there.
I presume. And then we decided that we'd like to get a house, and we bought a real small house in the southern part of Royal Oak, which was affordable. And then as time went on, we moved out to Troy. But, you know, this thought that the college graduates have got to jump into a large, expensive home in a community like Troy or Birmingham, it's just out of the question. We've gone too far with our development of homes to really do that. So, you know, maybe there's a niche in here for affordable housing, but I don't see a real big niche.
I agree. You know, just bouncing off what Karen said earlier about a joint partnership with a company. I know Henry Ford did that in Dearborn with some really interesting, cute homes, and they're still there today. So, you know, a company, you know, it was to bring in employees. That's the same concept. So that was done before, back in the 20s, 30s. We could duplicate it again if a company felt that they could develop a work-live campus. Could happen. And they could develop some nice homes that they really would like their employees to live in, not just a
Can I get a
project-type home.
Second chance.
Okay, go ahead.
So this is about the affordable housing, right? Now, one thing that always bothers me is like Troy School District is very good, but then if we don't have affordable housing, then how are we going to replenish the schools? The students will be all graduating and gone. So we kind of have to think about the sustainability of these good schools. So I know we need to have affordable housing so that people can leave, new families can come in and live in Troy, and you know, go to the elementary schools or middle schools.
The counter to that is...
Doesn't seem to have been a problem in Troy.
No, and the counter to that is Birmingham has a very active school district, so does Bloomfield Hills. And they certainly don't have affordability for me.
Grosse Pointe.
Grosse Pointe. So it's not like we have to be the answer for everybody's house, but certainly we cater to the people that want to basically find Troy as their home.
Just one more thought, if I may. I think the price of land in Troy being at a premium would probably lend itself to affordable housing requiring a certain density for it to be affordable, right? I mean, that's just simple math, right? And so as we tackle this topic and start this conversation, we have to keep in mind that we've already had certain kind of projects come before us that were of a certain density, or a rezoning of the northwest corner of John R. and Big Beaver, that had a huge pushback from neighbors because of the density.
Sure.
So it's possible that we'll get the pushback and the typical response, great project, but not in my backyard. Affordable housing, great idea, but find another property somewhere else, because I don't want this density, I don't want this height, and I don't want this demographic in my neighborhood. I mean, and that's just the reality of the conversation, because we've already heard it.
Right.
So
let's
you know,
listen.
it's a challenging conversation to have, of saying, what does affordable housing look like? And not only what, because we can have, an architect can put a project on paper. It's more about where can affordable housing be done in Troy, because that's
Right.
a lot of these conversations are neighborhood nodes, pushback on that, urban land rezoning, pushback on that. You know, how do we get affordable housing if we can't even rezone a corner to higher density with high-end luxury apartments? You know, those are conversations that I don't think they're straightforward.
Well, there are places like the new, actually, the name escapes me, at the 888 building.
Yep.
Those apartments, they are not, there's enough transition space in between that development and the single-family homes to make it work. So I think we can find spots.
Yeah, I think those are more luxury, right?
Those are gonna be
Those are
higher.
Very high end.
Yeah, luxury.
But I'm saying you could do something in a slightly lower.
But we
but
still
then-
had pushback from those neighbors to the north.
Oh, we sure did,
So,
yeah.
I mean,
Even though it was maybe 1,000 feet away.
right, it's
Yep.
not, yeah.
I understand. Anything else? Well, with that, then, thank you, Mr. Lambert, for an excellent job of leading our meeting last time. And with that, I'll adjourn the meeting.